Welcome to Sounds Like Portraits. I'm Philippe Ungar. This is a podcast with creative humans. Don't forget to subscribe on iTunes or Spotify, and thanks for giving your comments on soundslikeportraits.com. In this episode, I'm talking with art collector Mario Cader-Frech from Miami. For almost 30 years, Mario and his husband Robert have some guidelines when they buy a work for their US-centric collection of contemporary art. First, they draw up a budget, and then they have to fall in love with the work. As Mario put it, the curators or the gallerists or the art dealers try to convince us that something is a great piece, but nobody can unless we know it and we feel it. So this week, the question is, what is an eye for art? It's time to listen to him. But before, he told me what he tried to do all his life.
All my life, I've tried to keep continuous education, probably. It's always learning something new. There is a little nerd inside of me that loves to do research. For example, when virtual reality started to come up, I studied it. I got to the point where I was reading about virtual reality, not just to experience it as an user, but to understand what it really does to you as a human, to the mind, and how it transports you to an ideal or utopian place.
How would you describe your life without art?
Oh, it would be a white blank canvas, empty, void, boring. I don't know if I would be able to have a conversation without thinking art, because since I was a little kid, I was attracted to art. My oldest sister is a painter, but she's a painter of, landscapes and the typical painting school. I love to see how she painted, and I was so excited when she got into conceptual contemporary art. During the Civil War in El Salvador, for a few months or a year or so, we moved to Guadalajara, Mexico, and I lived with my older sister because we're 10 years apart. And I have a very vivid memory of her going to the painting school in Mexico, and they were pushing her to do like a Pollock kind of paintings, and I was so excited to see the development of an artist. So that's the first artist that I came across, and it embedded into my life. But it's something probably I was attracted naturally. Later on, my next door neighbor in Washington, D.C., said, if you are so interested in arts, why don't you study arts? And I knew that was not a field my parents would pay for. They would pay for business, they would pay for medical school, engineering, things of the sort. I mean, they would probably have paid, but they would not have been so happy. So he said, well, if it's not something you can study, because I was at Georgetown University at the time, why don't you volunteer at the National Gallery of Art? They will train you to be a docent, and that's in itself basically art school. And then they will train you for every new exhibit that comes to the National Gallery of Art so that you can talk about it with the guests or the people you're giving a tour. And I thought, that's brilliant. So I did it for 15 years. So that's my art school.
And how did you come to collecting contemporary art?
Well, it was the same next door neighbor that probably educated me about buying art, not just appreciating it. And my roommate was a painter, an artist as well. But he painted for himself. He never really painted to be represented by a gallery or to sell. He just painted for the love of painting. And I would just sit there, and they had like a little sofa in his studio. We had a carriage house. Washington, D.C. has this old type style homes. And I would just hang out with him painting, and I didn't realize until I'm telling you the story that I did that with my sister, and then I did it with my roommate. I just hung out with him. But the next door neighbor said, I should start buying art, because if I like art, I should invest in art. And no one really had put that thought in my head until he did. And I bought at the time, he was known, he was not famous. He was a graffiti artist in New York, and I fell in love with graffiti because I thought, wow, how daring to actually go and paint illegally in the subway tunnels and things of the sort. And he happened to be a Keith Haring. So it's one of those lucky moments in your life. And
Did you meet Keith Haring?
no, I never met him. Yeah, I did see him in gallery openings. Actually, he had like a little T-shirt shop that he had opened up. I remember, and I remember going there to buy a T-shirt. But for me, it was not at the time. It was not interesting to get to know the artist. I didn't realize you could get to know the artist. I just thought he was a graffiti artist and, not approachable in my mind. So I was more interested in the T-shirt at the moment. It was a really good looking T-shirt.
Are you interested in people's reactions when they look at your collection, your own collection?
Yes, actually, yes, very interesting. And it's a rewarding moment in a way because there's people that know about art and they come to the house. They do know about art, but they come to the house and they're like, really? This is art? And then you have people that are avid contemporary art, either collectors or curators, that they already come to put the collection in a little box and judge it. But it's very interesting. And I have friends that have no interest in art whatsoever. No education, no background, no knowledge, nothing about art. And those are my favorite ones because some of them come and there's a piece of art that speaks to them or that touches their emotions. And that's when you realize, wow, art can be very powerful because these are people that are not even interested in the subject matter. So it's very interesting to see people's faces and reactions when they come into the house and see it.
So would you say that it's not necessary to know something to enjoy art?
Absolutely. You don't need to know anything about art to feel it or to connect with it. And I would probably say half of my friends are not interested or knowledgeable in art. And I see it happen all the time. Even with my mother. She likes, flowers and landscapes and portraits. And sometimes she comes to the house and you see her pondering on a piece and she questions, she feels, she connects or maybe actually disconnects from the piece, but there's a reaction to it.
Would you say that their reactions are a good way to better know them?
I never thought about it that way. Would agree that it would be a way to get to know someone better, more intimate, by looking at the reactions they have with encountering art, especially the ones that are not art aficionados.
And would you say that looking at a private collection is a good way to better know the collector? Would you say that?
Sure, it's entering into somebody's private realm. We only have our art collection in our house now. Before it used to be in public spaces, but not anymore. So if you want to see our art, you have to come to our house.
So we have to be invited.
So how do you get into somebody's house? You have to somehow be invited. So there's already a barrier that you've crossed. If I don't know you and you want to come and see the art collection, somehow we have to get to know each other before I open the door of my house and let a stranger in. So you do get to know people and they get to know you more intimately because it is your house. And you may, depending on how you feel and the connection, that feeling that you get from the person, you may open more doors, like to your bedroom, to your bathroom, because there is art in our closet. So you can't show everything in your house to just anyone that walks in.
I like the idea that art collection could be a connector between people, between, potential friends for you.
Absolutely. We have made so many friends of friends, or even acquaintances of friends or colleagues in the art world, because we are, or I am, involved with MoMA, with the Reina Sofia in Madrid, with Art Basel Miami Beach, or Art Basel in general. So you have these circles of friends in each of the places that you belong to. And maybe somebody on the board says, would you please allow my friend to come to your house? And there is already a connection. And all of a sudden, this other friend shows up and you actually become friends with your friend's friend, or even better friends with your friend. So it's very funny.
So it's the beginning of a community, your
Absolutely.
fans community.
Absolutely. You make circles out of your art collection, yeah.
What makes you buy your works of art? What's the process?
It has changed throughout the years. So let's say we've been collecting for almost 30 years. 29 years will be in February that Robert and I have been together. So since we met, we started to buy art. I think he is involved in the arts because of me. Because when we met, he has always been very interested in architecture. And so that's how we complement. He builds amazing places, and I help fill it up with art. And he's got a really great eye with design and furniture. But when we first started to buy art, we met a curator here in New York. We were friends with this woman, Janet Phelps. She was the curator of AMFAR here in New York. She said, there is a process to buy art. And she was the first one that taught us that you needed to enter a market and buy art intelligently. And I always have the problem of falling in love with an art piece, and it gets explained, you fall in love with it even more or deeper, and there's some sense of a connection. I would probably have bought everything on instinct, but early on we met Janet, and she taught us how to buy what you like, what you're passionate about, but yet make some sense out of it, so that it has a narrative, so that it can be, one piece can converse with the other. So when you enter, there's harmony of one conversation. So I quickly realized I like artists that deal with social issues, that speak about different social issues in their art. And so if you look at our art collection from the beginning of the 1990s to today, it really is a timeline of all the social issues that have been fought for by the different minorities or different communities, or the country in general, the state of the United States, because our collection started and still is US centric, even though we do have an eye on Latin America and specifically on El Salvador, but that's like, let's say, another arm, right? And also at the time we were friendly with Amy Capelazzo, who she's a big arts person these days. And she also gave us some tips about collecting contemporary arts. There was also Tom Healy, who was a gallerist in Chelsea, who also helped us understand how to smartly make an art collection from the beginning. Basically, they all agreed and they said, if you like white, well, buy all white. If you like blue, well, buy everything blue. But there's gotta be some thread that connects everything that you own. And luckily, we had those people around us from the very beginning that helped us set the tone. Janet helped us create the first 10 years of our collection. Then we thought we could do it on our own. Like I'm sure everybody thinks they've learned enough. And we started to do it on our own, and we realized, oh, I think we're going in all these different directions, and we have more than one narrative, so now we need to clean up and start all over, or not start all over, but, step back and clean up and focus again. And now we have a curator that helps us do that. Her name is Claire Bruchel.
She made an episode in Sounds Like Portraits.
Yes, and that she's the one that connected you and I. So that's how we buy art. We know what we like, but we want to make sure that it fits in a narrative. So there's a common thread. So when you look at all of it, there's a conversation. And that is now what we're trying to do with this new offshoot of collecting contemporary art from El Salvador, which is where I was born. And luckily Claire is in our lives, who is helping us, making sure that what we acquire on this side will be able to converse in the same room with the other side of the collection.
How do you feel this conversation? Tell me more about that.
I think that a piece of art has its own description or artist statement or narrative. And that narrative has to be in line with the narrative of the piece next to it or in front of it. so that when you look at both of them, you can say, okay, both of these pieces are touching on X social issue, but this artist is from Berlin, and the issues there are so much different from, let's say, an artist from El Salvador. But it's the same issue, the same social issue in two different worlds. And when you look at the art pieces, they are having that conversation, but it's silent, yeah.
What kind of feeling do you get about this silent narrative?
I think that in order to understand the narrative, you either have to read about the artist or the artist statement for that work of art, or somebody tell you what these works of art are trying to convey, or the conversation or the narrative they're trying to express. I don't know if you would feel the conversation. I think that needs to be explicitly told.
So the conversation is not the connection, the first connection that you were talking about.
I would say no, and in a way say yes, because the works of art have to visually connect as well. Not just the narrative that they bring along, but they visually have to somehow have a harmony so that you can place them in the same room or in the wall facing each other. So when you do walk and you don't know anything about anything, at least you see the visual harmony. So I guess there's two narratives. Now, thinking of your question deep, with a second thought, one is the narrative, and one is the visual communication.
So a collection is not only an accumulation of pieces, it's much more.
Yes, but it depends who the collector is. I have friends who are collectors that just accumulate, and they accumulate for a hopeful potential value. They accumulate for the market, and it's okay. There is nothing wrong with why you collect. Then there's collectors who just focus on one particular, let's call it decade, or it may just be drawings, one discipline. And there's collectors like us that I would say, I don't know what percentage, but just to put a number, 50% of our art collection, it's more than having just bought the art piece that fits the narrative we want to create, or the issue or the color or the topic that we want to collect. But 50% of the works of art are memories, they're souvenirs of having supported either the artist or the art exhibit or the biennial. There's more for us. So the art pieces it's a collection of memories. It's a souvenir of our life as well. It's not just an accumulation of objects.
As a collector, what kind of experience are you looking for yourself within your collection?
Ideally, if I could, if I had the time, if I had I don't know if every collector, but I give myself a budget so that I don't go crazy buying left and right. So I have a budget that I want to follow and that I want to respect. And this is something that it's self-imposed. I would probably want to have my entire collection composed of works of art that I had some relationship in the production, in the making, meaning I supported the artist to exhibit at the Venice Art Biennial, and this art piece is part of that. So when I look at the art piece, it doesn't just look great in the house. It not only has a great synergy with the rest of the works of art, visually and narratively, but there's an emotional attachment to it because I feel I was part of it, of accomplishing something in the art world. So collecting memories, collecting moments, for me, it's the best reward of having that piece hanging in the wall.
You were talking about a great eye for art. How would you define an eye for art?
Let me cite the book called, it was either The Tipping Point or Clicking, one of the two. but I think it was clicking. It was the second book. There's a moment in your life that you become an expert at something, whether you have a medical eye or you have a architectural eye or you have the art eye. You develop it unconsciously through the years of educating yourself, whether it's through lectures, podcasts, text, magazines, and then hitting the pavement to go to art galleries, museum shows, studios, artist studios. And it's this accumulation of knowledge that you have within you that helps you say, that's good design, that's an amazing building, or I think you may have X disease. My father can tell you, I think you may have this disease, and you go like, how did you know that? He's 90 years old. It's the accumulation of looking at something over and over and exposing yourself to bad, okay, and great art. And there's a moment when you say, this is an amazing art piece.
When is this moment?
It can happen faster to some people, and it can take a lifetime for other people. I remember Tom Healy, Amy Capelazzo, Janet, these people that were in our lives early on. They were super young. They're younger than we are, and they had already developed that eye. They already knew, look at this artist, check out this other artist, because they had that, let's call it, art clinical eye. And then, of course, eventually I got it, and Robert as well got it. And there's moments when we're walking in an art fair, for example, Robert says, wow, check out this piece. And then we have no idea who the artist is. And we like the art piece, and then we do a little due diligences on the art piece and the artist, and you go, wow, we've developed that eye, because everything checks out.
And you say, we developed that eye. So it's something you share with Robert.
Absolutely, but sometimes it happens alone, but we try to go to the art fairs together. And so this moment happens together, and it could be instigated by either him or I. And then the other one kind of catches on, and then together we hone in into, okay, this is the right piece or not.
But you have to agree together on the same piece.
Oh, when we acquire pieces, I have acquired many pieces on my own, but of course, I always share, because all these pieces eventually will be hanging in our house, right? And he has great trust in my eye, in my taste, in my knowledge, and has, let's say, never questioned it. But he has developed it on his own, and sometimes he comes and he says, I saw this amazing piece, and then I look at it and we together say, okay, let's buy it.
How do you try to convince him that there's something in a work of art you really like?
You don't. You don't try to convince. It's either there or not. The curators or gallerists or art dealers, they do try to convince you that it's a great art piece. Neither Robert on his own, neither me by myself or together, nobody can convince us unless we know it and we feel it.
Does it add something to a collector like you to know the artists personally? I mean, especially if, when you collect contemporary art.
In my case, personally, yes. Getting to know the artist, it's better because you understand the process. You can read about it, or the gallerist can tell you about it. But to hear from the artist and to spend some time with the artist, even not speaking about art, but speaking about other issues, you connect with the artist and you connect with the art that he or she produces deeper. So it is a much more interesting and rewarding experience to get to know the artist. There's only been one case, and I'm not going to name names, that meeting the artist was actually the opposite. I met the artist and I was like, oh my God, this has nothing to do with what I thought these artworks really represented or conveyed, or let's say the artist statement in the gallery said. It was one artist in 30 years It's not
But
bad.
it's super interesting because there's a difference between the artist and the person behind the artist.
Well, yeah, I believe so because we are friends with several artists, and I would say they have two personalities, you know.
Two sides.
Yeah, and it happens. I worked most of my life at MTV, and it was the same. You met the person, let's say, and on stage it was a whole different human being than backstage or completely outside of the work realm. And contemporary artists are the same. And I am probably the same when I am working as a collector versus when I'm working as a philanthropist or I'm working, for example, right now I'm a fellow at Harvard University. It's a different Mario that it's there than at MoMA last night or when I worked at MTV. So we all have many hats.
But I have a Mario in front of me. What would be the thread between all these different sides or faces of your personality?
Creativity, yeah. Because if you look at everything that I do, let's say my career with MTV was creating, innovating social impact content, which still is what I would say in the infancy stages. Um, Being a philanthropist, you have to be creative because you can't just throw money. You have to think, okay, how am I going to be giving money so that in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years from now, I can look back and give you a story, a narrative. And as a collector, you have to be creative.
When you commission a work from an artist, what kind of relationship do you have with him or her? What kind of Mario's faces is it? We were talking about different faces.
Most of them are for real estate projects. So they do have a, let's call it a limitation or guidelines, because it may be a wall, it may be a space, it may be an area, and we have a general idea of what it could be, and based on that we select an artist, we brief the artist, but then at the end you have to let them do their thing. You can't manipulate it or control it, because then it becomes a collaboration.
Is it something like a dream for a collector like you to collaborate with an artist to make a work of art?
I'm going to speak about me, my Mario, because I am a very creative person. I would not mind collaborating with an artist in telling the artist, oh, maybe you could do it like this or you could do it like that. But ultimately, egotistically, yes, you would like your ideas to be accepted and produced by the artist, but you can't control that. And if you want to, then it's not fair and it's probably not going to come out right.
I'm gonna leave the room. Please hold the microphone and add whatever you want to the interview.
Well, it has been a pleasure to meet you in person and see how you think about getting information from the people that you interview. I've heard some of your podcasts and they were all wonderful. And I hope that you were able to get information out of me that I probably knew I had somewhere in the back of my head, but I had never put it into words. So I thank you for making me think and making me come out with information that was inside of me and be able to share it with people who are listening to this podcast and hopefully inspire them to support the arts. Thank you.
Thank you, Mario, for sharing your story. It was Sounds Like Portraits, a podcast by Philippe Ungar. Don't forget to subscribe on iTunes and Spotify, and thanks for giving your comments on soundslikeportraits.com. Music Charmeuse de Serpent, composed and conducted by Olivier Glisson. See you soon for the next episode.